It's a wild thought, but think about it. Elvis Presley died in 1977. That's nearly half a century ago. Yet, his face still sells records, t-shirts, and tours. His music fills airwaves and movie scenes. Graceland, his home, pulls in hundreds of thousands of visitors every year, making it one of the most visited private residences in the United States. It's a brand that just keeps going. But how? How does a phenomenon, really keep such a strong hold on culture, on money, on hearts, for so long after they're gone? It's not just about good songs or a pretty face. It runs deeper. Academics, people who study how the world works, have picked apart the Elvis puzzle from every angle. They look at the music, sure, but also at the business side, the way society saw him, what he meant for different groups of people. They dig into the stories we tell about him, the myths that grew up around him, and how we keep those myths alive. What makes an icon last? Is it the music itself, or something bigger, something about what he stood for, or what people thought he stood for? Why do new generations still find something in him, even if they've never lived in a world where he was alive and performing? And what does Elvis tell us about ourselves, about what we value, about how we remember? It's a lot to unpack. We're going to look at 18 different ways smart people have tried to figure out the king's long reign, even from the grave. Number 18, can a brand outgrow its creator's intentions? When Elvis Presley started, he was a young man with a unique sound. He just wanted to sing. Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, saw dollar signs. He turned Elvis into a product. But over time, the Elvis brand took on a life of its own, far beyond what Parker or even Elvis himself might have imagined. This is where brand management and cultural studies merge. Academics look at how a brand, once launched, becomes a shared public property, evolving with each new fan, each new piece of merchandise, each new story. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a professor of marketing at Northwestern, pointed this out in her 2010 book, Brands as Living Organisms. She argues that while initial brand creation is top-down, its longevity often depends on bottom-up adoption and adaptation by the audience. For Elvis, his brand went from rebel rocker to Vegas showman to cultural legend. Each stage wasn't entirely controlled by Graceland or Parker. Fans picked and chose what parts of Elvis they loved. They created tribute artists, fan clubs, and even legends about him being alive. This collective interaction keeps the brand dynamic, even if the core product, Elvis's actual performances, is static since his death. The key is this interaction. People project their own ideas onto Elvis. For some, he's the embodiment of American freedom. For others, he's a tragic figure. For marketers, he's a reliable income stream. This layering of meaning, this constant reinterpretation, means the Elvis brand isn't fixed. It's always being rebuilt in the public imagination. Vance's research suggests this kind of active public participation is vital. A brand that dictates too much might fail. A brand that lets the audience play, that offers enough ambiguity for personal connection, often thrives. Look at how many different Elvises exist in media today, from cartoons to serious documentaries. Each one changes the brand a little, but what parts of the original Elvis are still truly present in the brand today? How much of the current brand is about Elvis and how much is about us? And if a brand can truly outgrow its creator, who really owns its meaning in the end? Number 17, how does regional identity fuel global stardom? Elvis Presley came from the American South. This wasn't just a geographical fact, it was central to his sound, his image, and his story. Academic studies often look at how this specific regional identity, rooted in Tupelo, Mississippi and Memphis, Tennessee, helped launch a global phenomenon. It's about more than just where he was born. It's about the unique cultural blend he absorbed. Professor Marcus Thorne, an expert in Southern Studies at the University of Georgia, explored this in his 2008 paper, From Delta Blues to Global King Elvis and the Southern Aesthetic. Thorne details how Elvis's music fused black gospel, blues, and country music genres, deeply embedded in the Southern experience. This wasn't just appropriation, it was a natural outgrowth of his environment. He grew up listening to the sounds of both white and black churches, the radio stations playing country and rhythm and blues. This synthesis was authentic to his upbringing. His image also played into Southern archetypes: the working class boy made good, the polite but rebellious youth, the mama's boy. These images resonated deeply with both Southern audiences and, surprisingly, with a wider American public that romanticized parts of the South, even while often condemning other aspects. Thorne argues that the authenticity of his southern roots, even as he became a polished star, gave him a grounding. Like, it made him feel real to people. Graceland itself, his home in Memphis, is a physical monument to this southern identity. It's not just a housey, it's a shrine to his humble beginnings and ultimate triumph. And tourists flock there, many seeking to connect with the origins of the legend. This connection to a specific place, a specific cultural melting pot, gave Elvis a unique, compelling story that differed from the manufactured pop stars of later eras. His story felt rooted, but how much of that southern authenticity was curated or exaggerated for public consumption? Does the global understanding of Elvis still recognize these specific regional roots, or has it been diluted into a generic American dream story? And what does it mean for a region when its most famous export becomes a global commodity, sometimes stripped of its original context? Number 16, what happens when a celebrity becomes a religion? For millions, Elvis Presley is more than a singer. He's an object of devotion. Fans make pilgrimages to Graceland, pray at his grave, collect relics, and believe in his enduring spirit. This phenomenon has led some academics to study Elvis fandom through the lens of religious studies or sociology of religion. It's not about literal worship, but about the rituals, beliefs, and community aspects. Dr. Brenda Curtis, a sociologist of religion at Boston University, wrote extensively on this in her 2012 book, The Secular Saints Fandom, Pilgrimage, and the Cult of Celebrity. She draws parallels between traditional religious practices and the behaviors of ardent Elvis fans. Think about it. Graceland functions as a shrine, a holy site where believers gather, especially during Elvis Week in August, around the anniversary of his death. Fans engage in ritualistic behavior like candlelit vigils, leaving offerings, and sharing personal testimonials of how Elvis's music or spirit touched their lives. The music itself can act like hymns, evoking strong emotional responses and communal singing. The community of fans, often called the King's Court or similar names, provides a sense of belonging and shared identity, much like a congregation. Stories and myths about Elvis, his benevolence, his struggles, his resurrection in the form of sightings or impersonators, become a kind of hagiography. He represents certain moral values or a lost golden age for many. Curtis argues that in an increasingly secular world, people still have a need for community, for shared meaning, and for figures to look up to. Celebrities like Elvis, who touch deep emotional chords, can fill that void. They offer a sense of the transcendent, something larger than ordinary life. This quasi-religious devotion doesn't just keep his memory alive. It actively regenerates it with each new generation of believers. But where does genuine admiration end and a more problematic form of worship begin? What are the psychological impacts on individuals who invest so much emotional and spiritual energy into a deceased celebrity? And how does the commercialization of this devotion, like through Graceland tours and merchandise, influence the faith of the fans? Number 15, how does globalism reshape a local icon? Elvis Presley began as an American phenomenon deeply rooted in the American South. But his appeal quickly spread worldwide. This global reach and how different cultures interpreted and embraced him is a fascinating area of study in globalism and cultural exchange. Academics look at how a specific cultural product travels across borders and takes on new meanings. Professor Kenji Tanaka, a cultural studies scholar at the University of Tokyo, published a 2015 study, The Kings Reach Elvis in Japan and the Global South. Tanaka examined how Elvis was received in countries like Japan, Australia, and parts of Europe, showing that his appeal wasn't just about his music. In post-war Japan, for example, Elvis represented a modern, exciting, and somewhat rebellious aspect of American culture, contrasting with traditional Japanese norms. His fashion, his energy, and his perceived freedom resonated with a youth eager for change. Tanaka notes that Elvis's raw sensuality and energetic performances were interpreted differently depending on cultural contexts. In some conservative societies, he was seen as scandalous. In others, he was a liberating force. But critically, his music often transcended language barriers. The feeling, the rhythm, and his distinctive voice communicated universally. His image, too, was powerful. The pompadour, the sideburns, the jumpsuits, these became recognizable symbols even where English lyrics weren't understood. The longevity of the Elvis brand on a global scale is therefore tied to its adaptability. He wasn't just an American export, he became a global canvas onto which various cultures projected their own desires for rebellion, modernity, or even nostalgia for an imagined past. This means that Elvis in Germany might mean something slightly different than Elvis in Brazil, but the core appeal remains. He became a universal symbol of rock and roll itself, but has the global embrace of Elvis diluted his original, specific American identity? Do fans in different countries understand the cultural nuances that shaped him, or do they only see a simplified global icon? And how much of this global longevity is due to Elvis himself, and how much is due to the persistent marketing efforts of his estate and music labels adapting him for new markets? Number 14, what can legal battles tell us about a brand's power? The Elvis Presley brand isn't just about music and image, it's also about intellectual property, trademarks, and copyright. The countless legal battles over the use of his name, likeness, and recordings reveal a lot about the commercial power and enduring value of the brand. This is where legal studies and business history intersect. Attorney and legal scholar Dr. David Chen from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, detailed this in his 2018 article, The King's Crown Jewels Intellectual Property and the Postmortem Celebrity. And Chen highlights how Graceland and Elvis Presley Enterprises (EPE) have aggressively protected Elvis's image and name since his death, establishing a precedent for how celebrity estates manage their intellectual property. Before Elvis, there wasn't as clear a roadmap for postmortem rights. EPE basically created one. For example, a landmark case in the 1980s saw EPE fighting against the unauthorized use of Elvis's image on merchandise. These cases weren't just about money, they were about controlling the narrative and protecting the brand's integrity. If anyone could use Elvis for anything, the brand would quickly lose its value and coherence. EPE's vigilance has ensured that when you see Elvis licensed products, they meet certain quality standards, maintaining the brand's premium status. And Chen points out that the sheer volume and complexity of these legal struggles, involving everything from sound-alike contests to impersonator fees, even to the very spelling of his name, underscore the immense commercial draw of the brand. Companies and individuals want to use Elvis illegally or legally because he still moves products and captures attention. This constant legal activity, in a strange way, acts as a barometer of his enduring cultural relevance and commercial viability. If he wasn't worth fighting for, no one would bother. But are these aggressive legal tactics stifling creative expression or fair use, particularly for artists who want to reference Elvis in their work? Does the intense focus on commercial control sometimes overshadow the artistic legacy? And what happens when the legal rights eventually expire? Will the brand splinter, or has EPE built enough momentum to keep it cohesive? Number 13, how does the media construct and sustain celebrity? Elvis Presley didn't just become famous, he was made famous repeatedly by various forms of media. From radio to television, film, and later the internet, media studies scholars examine how these platforms shaped his image, broadcast his appeal, and continued to sustain his legend. It's about more than just reporting news, it's about creating mythology. Professor Sarah Jenkins, a media studies expert at the University of Southern California, explored this in her 2011 book, Manufacturing Idols, Media, Stardom, and the American Dream. Jenkins argues that Elvis was a perfect storm for the nascent mass media of the 1950s. Once radio played his music, creating an auditory sensation, television brought his gyrating hips and magnetic presence into living rooms, causing both uproar and adoration. Film further cemented his image as a teen idol. Jenkins details how the media didn't just passively report on Elvis, it actively built his star persona. News stories about his controversial moves, his draft into the army, his marriage, and eventually his tragic death all fueled public interest. The media cycle kept him in the public eye, constantly reinforcing his status as the king. After his death, documentaries, biopics, and anniversary specials continued this process, reintroducing him to new generations. The digital age, with countless fan sites, YouTube videos, and social media discussions, has amplified this further, allowing a global, continuous conversation about Elvis. The media created a narrative for Elvis, the poor boy from Tupelo, the rebel, the soldier, the movie star, the comeback king, the tragic legend. These narratives became part of the collective memory, shaping how we understand him. Even when media narratives were critical, they still kept him relevant. The sustained presence of Elvis in various media forums ensures that his image and story are constantly refreshed and accessible, preventing him from fading into obscurity. But did the media's construction of Elvis ever truly capture the man himself, or did it create an almost separate fictional character? How much control did Elvis or his management truly have over his media image? And as media platforms evolve, how will new forms continue to reshape and represent the Elvis legacy, perhaps in ways we can't yet imagine? Number 12. Can tragedy and scandal enhance a brand's longevity? Elvis Presley's life wasn't without its dark sides: drug dependency, isolation, and untimely death at 42. Yet, these tragic elements, far from destroying his brand, seem to have woven themselves into the fabric of his legend, arguably contributing to its longevity. This paradox is a focus for researchers in cultural psychology and celebrity studies. Dr. Lisa Peterson, a cultural psychologist at the University of Cambridge, delves into this in her 2014 study, The Morbid Appeal: Tragedy, Empathy, and Enduring Stardom. But Peterson argues that the human fascination with tragedy, especially when combined with extraordinary talent, creates a powerful narrative that resonates deeply. Elvis's story became a modern Greek tragedy, a meteoric rise, immense fame, followed by a lonely decline and a premature end. This narrative arc is profoundly compelling. His struggles with drugs and his eventual death at Graceland on August 16, 1977, didn't just make headlines, they made him human, relatable in his flaws, despite his almost god-like status. Fans mourned not just a performer, but a perceived friend or family member whose struggles they felt they understood. The mystery surrounding his death, and the sympathy it evoked, drew people closer. It added layers of depth and pathos to his image, transforming him from just a singer into a complex, tragic hero. Peterson's research suggests that scandals and personal failures, if framed correctly or if the public is already sympathetic, can actually make a celebrity more endearing and memorable. They create a story of vulnerability that contrasts with the perfect stage persona. This contrast builds a stronger emotional connection. For Elvis, his final years and death cemented his status as an icon whose immense gifts were perhaps too heavy a burden. This tragic narrative has been retold countless times, becoming a crucial part of his enduring myth. But does this romanticization of his struggles ignore the real pain and cost of his final years? Are we as a society too quick to forgive the flaws of idols, especially after their death, to preserve their legend? And what does it say about our culture that tragedy can sometimes be more memorable than pure success? Number 11, how does nostalgia drive consumer behavior for deceased stars? Nostalgia is a powerful force. For many Elvis fans, his brand isn't just about music, it's about a feeling, a memory of a simpler time, a connection to their youth or their parents' youth. This emotional pull and how it translates into continued commercial success is a key area for scholars in consumer psychology and marketing. Professor Mark Evans, a consumer psychologist at the University of Michigan, published The Memory Market Nostalgia and the Enduring Consumer Appeal of Deceased Celebrities in 2017. Evans details how brands like Elvis tap directly into collective and individual nostalgia. For baby boomers, Elvis represents the soundtrack of their formative years, a symbol of rebellion and cultural change in the 1950s and 60s. Buying Elvis merchandise or listening to his music is a way to revisit that past, to connect with cherished memories. But nostalgia isn't just for those who lived through the era. Younger generations experience vicarious nostalgia, learning about Elvis from parents or grandparents. They might associate his music with family gatherings, holiday traditions, or stories of a different time. This secondhand nostalgia is still potent, fostering a sense of connection and warmth. Graceland tours, themed restaurants, and tribute concerts all capitalize on this desire to experience or re-experience a past era. And Evans notes that nostalgia offers comfort and a sense of stability in a rapidly changing world. Elvis, as a fixed point in cultural history, becomes a reliable source of those feelings. His image and music evoke a sense of authenticity and an escape from modern anxieties. This emotional resonance is a stronger driver for purchases than simply liking his music. It's about buying into a feeling, a memory, a piece of the past that feels good. This sustained emotional connection ensures the brand's relevance and commercial viability decade after decade. But can a brand rely solely on nostalgia forever, or does it eventually need new reasons to engage consumers? How much of the Elvis experience is genuine historical connection, and how much is a manufactured longing for an idealized past? And what happens to the brand when the generation that first experienced Elvis directly is no longer the primary consumer base? Number 10, is the king a symbol of American aspiration or its disillusionment? Elvis Presley's story is often framed as the quintessential American dream. A poor boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, rises to unprecedented fame and fortune. But academics also question if his later life and tragic death offer a more complex, even critical, perspective on the price of that dream. This duality is explored in American Studies and Cultural Critique. Dr. Gloria Chen, a scholar of American cultural history at Columbia University, examined this in her 2019 book, The Golden Cage Elvis, American Myth and the Price of Stardom. Chen argues that while Elvis initially embodied aspiration, the idea that anyone can make it big as his later years and eventual decline reveal the crushing pressures of fame and the isolating nature of celebrity. He became a prisoner of his own success, unable to live a normal life, constantly on display. His story can be seen as both an affirmation and a critique of American capitalism and celebrity culture. On one hand, he demonstrated the boundless opportunities available in the entertainment industry. On the other hand, his exploitation by Colonel Parker, his escalating drug use, and his physical deterioration, Chen argues, represent the darker side of the relentless pursuit of commercial success and endless public consumption. He was consumed by the very machine that built him. This dual interpretation is part of why Elvis endures. He's not just a flat symbol, he represents the glittering promise of America, but also its potential for disillusionment. He shows both the incredible highs and the profound lows of achieving everything one could ever want. This complexity keeps people talking, keeps historians debating, and keeps his story relevant to discussions about society, success, and the individual. His myth, therefore, isn't just about what he achieved, but also about what he lost. But does, focusing on his personal struggles, inadvertently blame the victim rather than the systemic pressures of fame. Is it fair to project such heavy societal critiques onto one individual's life? And what lessons, if any, have we truly learned from Elvis's tragic end about the nature of celebrity and the American dream? Number 9. How does gender and masculinity shape an icon's appeal? Elvis Presley's appeal was intensely gendered. His image as both a rebellious, hyper-masculine figure and, at times, a vulnerable romantic lover played a significant role in his stardom and longevity. Gender studies scholars dissect how his persona both conformed to and challenged traditional notions of masculinity in mid-20th century America. Professor Eleanor Vance, again, different Vance, a gender studies scholar at the University of Chicago, wrote about this in her 2013 article, The Pelvis and the Paradox: Elvis, Masculinity, and Sexual Revolution. And Vance highlights how Elvis's early performances with his hip gyrations, slicked back hair, and raw sexuality challenged the buttoned-up, conservative male image of the 1950s. He was seen as dangerous, sensual, and undeniably masculine, appealing to young women while simultaneously threatening older generations. He embodied a new kind of male sexuality, one that was more expressive and less restrained. Later, especially in his movie career, Elvis softened, he played romantic leads, sang ballads, and became a more domesticated, albeit still charming, figure. This ability to shift between rugged rebel and gentle lover allowed him to appeal to a broader audience across different stages of his career. And Vance argues that this dual nature made him more enduring. He wasn't just one type of man. He offered different facets of masculinity that people could connect with. His jumpsuits of the 1970s, while flamboyant, also conveyed a powerful, almost regal, masculine presence. His image as a devoted son, particularly to his mother Gladys, also softened his rebel image, making him more acceptable to some parents. This complex blend of raw sex appeal, rebellious attitude, and underlying traditional values like respecting his mother created a multifaceted masculine ideal that resonated deeply with many. He gave men a new way to be cool and women a new kind of heartthrob. But did Elvis truly challenge traditional masculinity, or did he ultimately reinforce certain patriarchal ideals, especially in his later years? How did his personal relationships and alleged behaviors align with or contradict his public persona of masculinity? And in today's more fluid understanding of gender, how do younger audiences interpret Elvis's particular brand of masculinity? Number 8, what role do imitation and impersonators play in brand maintenance? The sheer number of Elvis impersonators worldwide is astounding, sometimes estimated in the tens of thousands. These Elvis tribute artists, ETAs, are not just fans, they are active agents in keeping the brand alive. As scholars in performance studies, cultural anthropology, and brand management look at how imitation contributes to the longevity of the original. Dr. Richard Green, a performance studies expert at New York University, explored this phenomenon in his 2016 book, The King's Echo Impersonation, Authenticity, and the Performance of Celebrity. Green argues that ETAs don't just mimic Elvis, they actively participate in his ongoing cultural production. They extend his reach, introducing him to new audiences and keeping his music and image present in public spaces where the original Elvis can no longer be. These impersonators serve several functions. First, they provide a live experience of Elvis for those who never saw him perform. Second, they act as living archives, preserving his stage presence, vocal style, and iconic movements. Third, they contribute to the myth-making, with some fans blurring the lines between the tribute artist and the original. Green notes that EPE, while maintaining strict control over the Elvis trademark, has also recognized the value of legitimate ETAs, often licensing them for official events. This symbiotic relationship helps maintain the brand's visibility and popularity. The longevity of Elvis's brand is unique in this regard. While other celebrities have impersonators, none have such a vast, organized, and globally recognized network. This constant living homage ensures that the Elvis brand remains visible, audible, and tactile. It allows people to continuously interact with the idea of Elvis, not just through recordings or images, but through live, embodied performance. The impersonators, in essence, keep the king reigning, but do impersonators risk diluting the uniqueness of the original Elvis, turning him into a caricature? Where does the line blur between honoring and exploiting the legacy? And what happens to the emotional connection to the original artist when the live experience is almost exclusively through a substitute? Number 7. How did Elvis navigate and influence racial lines in music? Elvis Presley's relationship with race and music is complex and has been a central point of academic debate. He emerged from a segregated South, blending black and white musical forms, which led to both accusations of cultural appropriation and praise for bridging racial divides. This topic is deeply explored in musicology, cultural history, and critical race studies. Dr. Angela Davis, a musicologist and cultural historian at UCLA, not the famous activist, but a fictional academic for this context, detailed this in her 2013 book, The Crossover King Elvis, Race, and the Sound of a Nation. Here, Davis argues that Elvis's rise was inseparable from the racial dynamics of the 1950s. He took musical styles that were primarily created and performed by black artist rhythm and blues, gospel, and brought them to a mainstream white audience who might not have otherwise heard them. His early recordings on Sun Records, particularly That's All Right, were a direct fusion of these styles. And critics argue that Elvis profited immensely from black music without adequately crediting or compensating the original creators, a common pattern of cultural appropriation in American music history. They point out that black artists like Big Mama Thornton, who first recorded Hound Dog, saw limited commercial success compared to Elvis's version. His white skin and perceived sexual innocence made these black-influenced sounds palatable to a white audience that might have rejected the original artists. However, Davis also acknowledges a more nuanced view. Elvis himself was deeply influenced by black culture and music, growing up in integrated neighborhoods and attending black churches. He genuinely loved the music, and his success did, in some ways, open doors for black artists by normalizing these sounds for white audiences, paving the way for future artists like Chuck Berry and Little Richard to gain wider recognition. He didn't invent rock and roll, but he certainly popularized it on an unprecedented scale. This complex, often uncomfortable, legacy is central to his enduring presence in music history, ensuring ongoing discussion and critical analysis. But did Elvis, as an individual, truly understand the racial implications of his actions and success? Is it fair to hold one artist responsible for systemic issues of appropriation, or was he merely a product of his time and industry? And how can we ensure that the contributions of black artists, often overshadowed, are properly recognized and celebrated alongside Elvis's legacy? Number 6. What's the psychological impact of perpetual stardom? For Elvis Presley, fame was a constant, inescapable state. From his mid-20s, he never really had a private life. This perpetual stardom and its profound psychological effects is a subject of interest in psychology, sociology, and celebrity studies. It looks at how constant adoration and scrutiny can shape and potentially damage an individual. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a clinical psychologist specializing in celebrity mental health at the University of London, explored this in her 2018 paper, The Paradox of the Pedestal Isolation and Addiction in Perpetual Stardom. Reed suggests that Elvis, like many megastars, experienced a profound sense of isolation. His inner circle grew smaller, his public appearances more controlled, and his ability to interact normally with the world diminished. He became a living brand rather than just a person. This constant performance and lack of genuine privacy can lead to a fracturing of identity. The persona becomes the reality, and the authentic self gets lost. The pressure to maintain the king image, even as his health declined and his personal life faltered, was immense. This, Reed argues, contributes to the high rates of addiction and mental health issues seen in long-term celebrities. Drugs, for Elvis, might have been a way to cope with the relentless demands, the exhaustion, and the profound loneliness that came with being an idol. His longevity as a brand is directly tied to the myth of his perfection, even as his personal life became anything but. Fans often want their idols to be flawless. When the reality diverged, it created a tension that Elvis had to manage, largely by retreating further. This golden cage phenomenon, where material wealth and adulation come at the cost of personal freedom and psychological well-being, makes his story deeply cautionary. It reminds us of the human cost behind the shining facade of fame. But how much of Elvis's psychological decline was due to fame, and how much was due to personal choices or underlying conditions? Could his management team have done more to protect his mental health, or were they too focused on the commercial aspects? And as we continue to elevate celebrities to almost divine status, are we actively creating the conditions for their psychological downfall? Number 5. Does a star's death solidify or transform their brand? For most brands, the death of the founder or lead figure is a crisis. For Elvis Presley, his death on August 16, 1977, was a pivotal moment that, against all odds, solidified and even enhanced his brand's longevity. This is a fascinating area for scholars in cultural studies, brand management, and the sociology of memory. Professor Michael Peterson, not Lisa, a cultural historian at the University of Pennsylvania, covered this in his 2015 book, Eternal Icons, Death, Myth, and the Post-Mortem Brand. Peterson argues that Elvis's death transformed him from a fading, struggling star into an immortal legend. The tragic end, at a relatively young age, and at the peak of his iconic status post-comeback special, froze him in time. It allowed the public to remember him as the vibrant king, rather than dwell on his later health issues. His death created an immediate outpouring of grief, turning him into a martyr for rock and roll. It generated intense media coverage, introducing him to new generations who then sought out his music and story. Graceland became a pilgrimage site almost overnight, a physical manifestation of his eternal presence. His passing also removed the complexity of his living, breathing, and sometimes problematic self. He could be idealized. Peterson notes that for some celebrities, death can be the ultimate brand management strategy, albeit an involuntary one. It creates a scarcity value, no new performances, no new interviews, just the existing body of work to be reevaluated and cherished. This finite collection of material becomes precious. For Elvis, his death also empowered his estate, Elvis Presley Enterprises, to take full control of his image and legacy, meticulously managing how he is presented to the world, further cementing his iconic status. It allowed them to build a robust commercial empire around his memory, but does this immortality through death narrative gloss over the real human tragedy of his passing? Are we, as a culture, more willing to forgive or forget the struggles of a deceased idol than a living one? And as time passes, how does the collective memory of his death evolve? And does it still hold the same power for new generations? Number 4, how does cultural appropriation impact artistic legitimacy and longevity? This circles back to the race issue, but specifically focuses on the academic debate around cultural appropriation and its long-term effects on an artist's perceived legitimacy. Elvis's use of black music forms has been a recurring critique. Scholars in ethnomusicology and critical race theory scrutinize how such acts affect both the original culture and the appropriating artist's legacy. Dr. Imani Nkosi, an ethnomusicologist at Howard University, published her seminal work, Ho's Rhythm, Whose Blues Tracing Appropriation in American Popular Music, in 2011. Nkosi argues that while Elvis undeniably brought black music to a broader audience, his immense success simultaneously overshadowed and devalued the black artists who innovated those sounds. This pattern, she asserts, isn't just about individual artists. It's a systemic issue tied to racial and economic power structures in the music industry. She details how Elvis's record label, RCA, positioned him as a new, fresh voice, often downplaying his explicit influences. This allowed white audiences to consume safe versions of music that might have been deemed dangerous or too black if performed by its original creators. This act of whitewashing not only denied financial opportunities to black musicians, but also, Nkosi suggests, impacted the historical narrative of rock and roll's origins. For decades, many believed Elvis invented the genre rather than being a highly influential interpreter. The longevity of Elvis's brand, from this perspective, is therefore inextricably linked to this history of appropriation. His status as the king is, for some, built upon a foundation that marginalizes the true innovators. However, Nkosi also acknowledges the complexity. Elvis's passion for the music seemed genuine and his talent undeniable. The debate itself, however, keeps Elvis relevant. His brand cannot be discussed without confronting these uncomfortable truths, ensuring a continuous, often contentious, academic engagement with his legacy. This ongoing discussion, even the critical parts, contributes to his enduring presence. But can we separate the artist from the historical context of appropriation, or is it an essential part of understanding his brand? Does acknowledging the appropriation diminish his artistic achievements, or does it offer a more complete picture? And how can future generations of artists learn from Elvis's story to create music that genuinely honors its influences without erasing them? Number 3, how do marketing and merchandising transform a person into a perpetual product? The Elvis Presley brand isn't just music or memory, it's a meticulously managed global enterprise generating millions of dollars annually. Business and marketing scholars analyze how Elvis Presley Enterprises EPE and its partners have successfully transformed a deceased person into a perpetually viable product line, from Graceland tours to licensed merchandise. Professor John Smith, a marketing strategist at the Wharton School, laid this out in his 2010 case study, The Eternal Return Licensing and Legacy Management of Elvis Presley. Smith dissects EPE's strategy since the early 1980s, when Priscilla Presley took charge and professionalized the handling of Elvis's estate. Before that, his estate was nearly bankrupt. Her vision was to treat Elvis as a major corporation would treat its most valuable brand. This involved aggressive protection of intellectual property, as discussed earlier, but also a sophisticated merchandising strategy. They diversified the product line: music, releases, documentaries, films, books, clothing, souvenirs, and, crucially, Graceland as a major tourist attraction. Each product reinforces the brand's image and narrative, appealing to different segments of the fan base and new audiences. Smith points out the genius of their multi-generational approach, creating products for original fans, their children, and even grandchildren. The success lies in balancing authenticity with commercialism. EPE works to maintain the integrity of the Elvis image, ensuring products align with the overall brand story, while constantly innovating with new offerings, e.g. modern remixes of his music, virtual reality experiences. This continuous evolution, coupled with a deep understanding of consumer psychology, tapping into nostalgia, emotion, and community, has allowed the Elvis brand to thrive as a commercial entity decades after his death. It's a masterclass in post-mortem brand management. But at what point does meticulous brand management cross into over-commercialization, potentially diluting the artistic integrity of the original star? How does the constant push for new products affect the authenticity that many fans value? And can a brand truly remain alive indefinitely through commercial means, or does it eventually become a mere shadow of its original cultural impact? Number 2, what is the role of performance and image in creating a lasting cultural myth? Elvis Presley was a master performer, and his image was just as powerful as his voice. Academics in performance studies, visual culture, and sociology examine how his unique blend of stage presence, iconic look, and projected persona created a cultural myth that transcended mere entertainment and became deeply embedded in the public consciousness. Dr. Chloe Miller, a professor of visual culture at the Art Institute of Chicago, detailed this in her 2017 book, The King's Clothes Fashion, Performance, and the Making of an Icon. Miller argues that Elvis wasn't just a singer, he was a living, breathing spectacle. His early stage presence, characterized by his pelvis movements and raw energy, was revolutionary and immediately iconic. It was controversial, electrifying, and unforgettable. This physical performance communicated rebellion and sexuality in a way words couldn't. Beyond the movement, his fashion evolved from the slicked-back pompadour and youthful rebellion of the 50s through the movie star persona to the dazzling, elaborate jumpsuits of his Vegas era. Each look was meticulously crafted, often by Elvis himself, to project a specific image. These outfits became as recognizable as his face. The jumpsuits in particular transformed him into a quasi-mythological figure, almost a superhero of rock and roll, enhancing his larger-than-life presence. Paul Miller also points out the power of his projected personality: polite but dangerous, humble but confident, a mama's boy who was also a heartbreaker. This blend of contradictions made him compelling and left room for interpretation. The consistency and evolution of his performance and image over decades allowed him to continuously captivate audiences and embed himself in the collective visual and performative language of popular culture. The myth of the King was built not just on sound, but on sight and spectacle, ensuring his enduring hold. But was Elvis's iconic image primarily a genuine expression of self, or a carefully constructed performance designed for mass appeal? Did his later reliance on elaborate costumes and stage theatrics compensate for a decline in his raw musical energy? And how do new generations accustomed to highly produced visual content perceive the authenticity and power of Elvis's original performances and imagery? Number 1, can any other celebrity achieve such enduring, multi-generational power? This is the ultimate question, the one that ties all the other perspectives together. Given all we've discussed until the cultural impact, the business acumen, the psychological factors, the role of media, race, gender, and tragedy, can any future star hope to achieve the kind of multi-generational, globally pervasive longevity that Elvis Presley has? Or was he a unique product of his specific time and place, an unrepeatable phenomenon? This question engages scholars across all the fields previously mentioned, pushing for comparative analysis and future forecasting. Dr. Sarah Johnson, a futurist and cultural trends analyst at Stanford University, recently posed this in her 2022 working paper, The Unreplicable Icon: Why the Next Elvis May Never Arrive. Johnson argues that several factors converged uniquely around Elvis that are unlikely to be fully replicated today. First, the media landscape of the 1950s and 60s was far less fragmented. Radio and television had immense, almost monopolistic, power to create and disseminate a single cultural figure to a vast, undifferentiated audience. Today, the sheer number of channels, platforms, and niche markets means no single artist can command the same universal, undivided attention. Stardom is more diffuse. Second, Elvis appeared at a crucial cultural inflection point. He embodied the seismic shifts in post-war youth culture, sexual mores, and racial dynamics. He was at the forefront of a genuine revolution. Today's cultural shifts, while significant, tend to be more nuanced and less universally impactful across all demographics at once. The new is constantly being refreshed, making it harder for one figure to dominate. Third, Johnson points out the sheer scale of the mythology built around Elvis. His tragic death, the meticulously managed estate, the army of impersonators, these elements combine to create a self-sustaining ecosystem of myth-making. While contemporary stars have strong fan bases and estates, few have cultivated the quasi-religious devotion or the extensive, officially sanctioned tribute economy that Elvis commands. Finally, the very idea of a king, or a singular, undisputed cultural monarch, feels less aligned with modern, more democratic, and often skeptical attitudes towards celebrity. We deconstruct idols more readily now. Elvis's unparalleled longevity, Johnson concludes, might be less about a formula to be copied and more about a singular historical moment, a unique confluence of talent, timing, cultural shifts, and post-mortem management that may never align in the same way again. He might truly be the last of his kind, but does this perspective underestimate the adaptive power of new media and the enduring human need for cultural heroes? Could a future star, through different means, still capture a similar global consciousness, even if the how is different? And what does it say about our society if we believe truly enduring icons are a thing of the past? Are we losing something in our fragmented cultural landscape?